It was a cold evening when downtown Seattle seemed busier than usual, yet one small detail went unnoticed by most people. Near Pike Place Market, a 12-year-old girl sat quietly on the rain-soaked steps, holding a small torn photograph like it was the most valuable thing in the world. People walked past without stopping. Cars slowed down, then moved on. The holiday season had turned the city into a maze of rushing shoppers, twinkling lights, and the constant hum of life moving forward, yet somehow, this child remained invisible. Her name was Lily Martinez, though nobody had bothered to ask. She wore a jacket 3 sizes too big, probably donated from some church charity drive, and her sneakers had holes that let the cold Seattle rain seep through to her socks. But what was most striking wasn't her appearance, it was the way she sat. Perfectly still. Patient. As if she'd learned long ago that the world wouldn't slow down for her, so she'd simply learned to wait. The photograph in her hands was barely recognizable anymore. Water damage had blurred most of the faces, and the edges were torn from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could make out 2 figures, a young woman with kind eyes and a smile that suggested better days, and a small baby wrapped in a pink blanket. That baby was Lily. The woman was her mother, Rosa Martinez, who had passed away 14 months ago from complications that might have been treatable if they'd had insurance, if they'd had money, if they'd had help. But they hadn't. That's when Jonathan Blake, a wealthy real estate developer and self-made millionaire, noticed something unusual. He'd been walking to his Mercedes parked nearby, his mind occupied with tomorrow's board meeting and the multi-million-dollar deal he was about to close. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his assistant, his lawyer, his accountant. He was, by every measure, a successful man. He owned properties across 3 states, had been featured in Business Insider, and had a penthouse view that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. But something made him stop. Not the child's clothes. Not the poverty that was so obvious it hurt to look at. But the look in her eyes, a mixture of sadness and strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was just existing. Surviving. And somehow, that quiet dignity in the face of such obvious hardship struck something deep inside Jonathan's chest. He'd seen homeless people before. Seattle was full of them. He'd donated to charities, written checks that his accountant assured him were tax-deductible, and felt good about himself for giving back. But he'd never actually stopped. Never actually looked. Never actually seen a person instead of a problem. Until now. And in that moment, standing in the cold rain with his $1,000 suit getting wet, Jonathan Blake decided to do something completely out of character. He decided to test this child, to see what kind of person she really was beneath the poverty and the pain. It was an impulse driven by curiosity, perhaps even cynicism. He'd spent too many years in business watching people lie, cheat, and manipulate for money. He'd learned to trust no one's intentions. So he wanted to know, was this child different? Or was everyone, in the end, just looking out for themselves? It was a decision that would change everything. Hey, everyone! Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this video from right now? Are you in the United States, Canada, India, the UK? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, what happens next in this story is something you won't want to miss. Now, let's continue. Jonathan approached slowly, his expensive leather shoes making soft sounds against the wet concrete. Lily looked up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no fear in her gaze. No expectation. Just a calm acknowledgement that another person existed in her space. "Excuse me," Jonathan said, his voice gentler than he'd expected. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Lily studied him for a moment, the way someone much older might assess a stranger's intentions. Finally, she spoke. "I'm fine, thank you." Her voice was small but steady. "Are you hungry?" Jonathan asked, crouching down to her eye level despite the puddle forming around his knees. There was a pause, Just a heartbeat, before Lily nodded. Yes, sir. I am. The honesty struck him. No elaborate story. No manipulation. Just the simple truth from a child who'd probably learned that lying only made things worse. Jonathan reached into his wallet, feeling the thick stack of bills he always carried. His hand hesitated for just a moment before he pulled out $300 in cash. More money than this child had probably ever seen in her life. He folded the bills and placed them carefully in Lily's small, cold hand. Here, he said, watching her eyes widen in disbelief. Use this for yourself. Buy some food. Get something warm to wear. Whatever you need. Lily stared at the money like it might disappear if she blinked. Sir, this is too much. I can't. You can, Jonathan interrupted. Consider it a gift. No strings attached. Use it for yourself, okay? Promise me. After a long moment, Lily nodded slowly. Okay. Thank you. Jonathan stood up, his knees protesting slightly. I'm going to get some coffee across the street, he said, gesturing to a nearby Starbucks. I'll be back in about 20 minutes. Will you still be here? Yes, sir. It was a test. A silent experiment to see what kind of heart this child carried. Would she run? Would she disappear into the city and use the money for who knows what? Would she even be there when he returned? Part of Jonathan expected, maybe even hoped, that she would take the money and vanish. It would confirm what he already believed about human nature, that everyone, given the chance, would choose themselves first. He walked to the coffee shop, ordered an overpriced latte he didn't really want, and positioned himself by the window where he could watch without being seen. Minutes passed like hours. The rain continued to fall, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the Christmas lights strung above. Doubt began to grow in his mind. What was he doing? This was ridiculous. He was a businessman, not a social worker. He had meetings tomorrow, deals to close, responsibilities that actually mattered to his bottom line. This child was a stranger. Her problems weren't his problems. But still, he watched. 15 minutes passed. Then 17. Then 20. And then he saw her. Lily was moving through the crowd, but she wasn't running away. She was walking with purpose, carrying several large bags that looked heavy for her small frame. Jonathan left his coffee and stepped outside, the cold air hitting him like a physical force. When Lily returned to her spot on the steps, something was different. Instead of new clothes or a smartphone or anything for herself, she had returned with 7 large bags of groceries. Bread, peanut butter, canned soup, pasta, rice, fresh fruit, milk, and even some toiletries. And she wasn't alone. Following behind her were 4 other people, 3 adults and 1 small boy who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. They were clearly H. Following behind her were 4 other people, 3 adults and 1 small boy who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. They were clearly homeless, their faces marked by the kind of exhaustion that comes from sleeping outside, from never feeling safe, from surviving rather than living. Lily had found them. Or maybe they'd always been there, invisible to people like Jonathan who walked past without seeing. She began distributing the food, her small hands working quickly to divide everything fairly. The adults tried to refuse at first, insisting she needed it more, but Lily was firm. Mrs. Chen, you gave me your gloves last week when my hands were freezing, she said to an elderly Asian woman who looked like she might cry. Mr. Davis, you showed me where the shelter serves breakfast on Sundays. Maria, you shared your sleeping bag when I had nowhere to sleep. And Tommy, she knelt down to the small boy's level. You're my friend. Friends share. She kept only a single sandwich and a bottle of water for herself. Jonathan stood frozen, watching this impossible scene unfold. The test had failed, or perhaps, it had revealed something far greater than he could have imagined. This child, who had every reason to be selfish, to hoard resources, to think only of her own survival, had instead chosen kindness. Not because anyone was watching. Not because she expected anything in return. But because, somehow, despite everything life had taken from her, she still believed in taking care of others. At that moment, Jonathan realized he hadn't been testing Lily. Life had been testing him. And he was failing. Jonathan walked over, his hands shaking slightly though he couldn't explain why. The group fell silent as this well-dressed stranger approached, their eyes wary. They'd learned to be cautious around people who looked like Jonathan, people with money and power who usually wanted them to disappear. But Lily looked up and smiled, a genuine expression that somehow made the cold evening feel a little warmer. "You came back," she said simply. "I did," Jonathan replied, his voice thick with emotion he didn't quite understand. "Lily, I need to ask you something. Why did you do that? I gave you that money for yourself. You could have bought warm clothes, a hotel room for a few nights, saved it for emergencies. Why did you spend it all on other people?" Lily tilted her head, considering the question as if the answer should be obvious. "Because I was hungry," she said, "but they were hungrier. And besides, these people are my family now." "Family," Jonathan repeated. "Mrs. Chen shares her food with me every Tuesday when the church gives out meals. Mr. Davis taught me how to stay safe at night and which places to avoid. Maria braids my hair and tells me stories about Mexico. And Tommy," she put her arm around the small boy, "he's like the little brother I never had. We look out for each other." The answer was simple, honest, and devastating in its purity. Jonathan felt his throat tighten. He'd spent his entire adult life building walls around his heart, convincing himself that compassion was weakness, that sentiment had no place in business, that caring too much would only hold him back. He'd made millions with that philosophy. Built an empire on calculated decisions and strategic relationships. But he'd never felt as wealthy as this homeless child looked right now, surrounded by people she called family. "That's beautiful," Jonathan managed to say, though the words felt inadequate. That's when he noticed something. Lily was clutching the torn photograph again, holding it against her chest like a shield. Something about it nagged at his memory, though he couldn't place why. "Can I ask what that is?" he said, gesturing to the photograph. Lily's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "It's my mom. And me, when I was a baby. It's all I have left of her. May I see it?" There was a long pause. Lily looked to Mrs. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, carefully, Lily extended the photograph toward Jonathan. He took it with trembling hands, bringing it closer to catch the light from the street lamp above. The image was badly damaged, barely visible in places, but there was something about the woman's face that struck him as familiar. Very familiar. And then he saw it. In the background of the photo, partially obscured by water damage, was a building. A very specific building with distinctive architecture and a sign that was just barely readable. Blake Properties, Grand Opening 2012. Jonathan's blood ran cold. "Where was this taken?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom said it was taken at some fancy event she worked at," Lily replied. "She used to work for a catering company, setting up parties for rich people. She said that was one of her last jobs before I was born." Jonathan's mind raced backward through years of memories, champagne toasts, and business celebrations he'd barely paid attention to. The grand opening of his first major property development in 2012. He'd hired a catering company. What was the name? Diamond Services? Premium Events? He'd been so focused on impressing investors and potential clients that he'd barely noticed the staff working the event. But there had been one woman, hadn't there? A young woman with kind eyes who'd asked him about his vision for the building, who'd seemed genuinely interested in his dreams rather than his bank account. They'd talked for maybe 10 minutes. She'd told him she was working 3 jobs to save money, that she wanted to give her future children a better life than she'd had. He'd been charmed by her optimism, her determination. In a moment of genuine connection, so rare in his world, he'd given her his business card and told her to call him if she ever needed anything. Her name had been Rosa. Rosa Martinez. "Your mother's name," Jonathan said slowly, each word feeling like it might shatter him. "Was it Rosa?" Lily's eyes widened. "Yes. How did you?" Jonathan's hand went to his jacket pocket, to the silver card holder he'd carried for over a decade. With shaking fingers, he opened it and searched through old business cards, receipts, and random notes until he found what he was looking for. A small piece of paper, yellowed with age, with a phone number written in careful handwriting. And a name, Rosa Martinez, called about job opportunity. He'd forgotten about it within days. Moved on to the next deal, the next property, the next conquest. When she'd called, and he now remembered that she had called, twice actually, he'd been too busy. His assistant had taken messages. He'd meant to call back. But he never had. One question led to another in his mind, pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to complete. Until a single, devastating truth surfaced. Rosa had been pregnant when they'd met. She'd been working 3 jobs to prepare for her child's future. She'd called him, probably desperate for the job opportunity he'd casually mentioned, and he'd ignored her. And then what? She'd struggled alone. Raised her daughter alone. Died alone, probably from some illness that could have been treated if she'd had the money, the insurance, the support that he could have provided with a single phone call. The wealthy man realized this was not a coincidence. It was fate catching up with him, presenting him with the living consequence of his negligence, his casual cruelty disguised as being too busy. He'd forgotten about it within days. Moved on to the next deal, the next property, the next conquest. When she'd called, and he now remembered that she had called, twice actually, he'd been too busy. His assistant had taken messages. He'd meant to call back. But he never had. One question led to another in his mind, pieces of a puzzle he didn't want to complete. Until a single, devastating truth surfaced. Rosa had been pregnant when they'd met. She'd been working 3 jobs to prepare for her child's future. She'd called him, probably desperate for the job opportunity he'd casually mentioned, and he'd ignored her. And then what? She'd struggled alone. Raised her daughter alone. Died alone, probably from some illness that could have been treated if she'd had the money, the insurance, the support that he could have provided with a single phone call. The wealthy man realized this was not a coincidence. It was fate catching up with him, presenting him with the living consequence of his negligence, his casual cruelty disguised as being too busy. "Lily," he said, his voice breaking, "I knew your mother. Not well, but I knew her. And I think I could have helped her. Should have helped her. But I didn't." The child looked at him with those impossibly old eyes, processing this information with a maturity that broke his heart. "It's okay," Lily said softly. "Mom always said that people get busy. That life moves fast." She never blamed anyone for her struggles. She said they were hers to carry. But Jonathan heard what Lily couldn't say. They shouldn't have been. She shouldn't have had to carry them alone. The truth was revealed, but acceptance did not come easily. Not for Jonathan, and surprisingly, not for Lily either. "I don't need your pity," Lily said suddenly, her voice sharper than before. She stood up, gathering her small sandwich and water bottle. "My mom and I, we did fine. We had each other. That was enough. Lily, please, I'm not offering pity." "Then what?" The girl's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her face that she angrily wiped away. "What are you offering?" "Money. I already saw what you do with money. You give it away to test people, to see if they're good enough or honest enough or whatever measuring stick rich people use." Those words hit Jonathan like physical blows, and he realized that this child, this incredible, compassionate child, saw right through him in a way that none of his business rivals ever had. "You're right," Jonathan whispered, sinking down onto the wet steps beside where Lily had been sitting. He didn't care that his suit was getting ruined, that people were staring, that this was completely inappropriate behavior for a man of his position. "You're absolutely right. I did test you. And that was wrong. It was cruel and condescending and everything that's wrong with people like me." Mrs. Chen, Mr. Davis, Maria, and little Tommy watched this exchange in silence, their presence a quiet reminder that this conversation had witnesses, that whatever happened next would matter. "When I gave you that money," Jonathan continued, "I expected you to fail. I expected you to prove that everyone, deep down, is selfish. Because that's what I've told myself for years. It's how I've justified my own selfishness, my own choices. If everyone's terrible, then I don't have to feel bad about being terrible too. He looked up at Lily, whose tears had slowed but whose expression remained guarded. But you didn't fail, Lily. I did. I failed your mother when she needed help. I failed her memory by forgetting her entirely. And I almost failed you by assuming you were like me, that you'd choose yourself over others. I wanted to choose myself, Lily admitted quietly, sitting back down but keeping distance between them. When you gave me that money, I thought about running. I thought about using it to get a bus ticket somewhere warmer, somewhere I could start over. I thought about buying a phone so I could try to find my aunt in California who Mom used to talk about. Then why didn't you? Because Tommy was hungry. Because Mrs. Chen's medicine costs money and she's been skipping doses to save up. Because Mr. Davis's shoes have holes in them and winter's getting worse. Because Maria's been sleeping outside in the rain to let me have the spot under the overpass that stays dry. Lily's voice broke. How could I run when they've been keeping me alive? Jonathan realized then that this wasn't a story about a rich man helping a poor child. This was a story about a child teaching a rich man what it meant to be human. Lily, I can't change the past. I can't bring your mother back or erase the years you struggled. But please, let me try to help now. Let me help all of you. He gestured to the small group. Not as a test. Not as charity. But as a small attempt at redemption for the person I should have been 14 years ago. We don't need saving, Mr. Davis spoke up for the first time, his voice rough but proud. We're survivors. We take care of each other. I can see that, Jonathan said. And that's beautiful. But you shouldn't have to just survive. Nobody should. You deserve housing, healthcare, stability. You deserve to live, not just exist. Fine words, Maria said, her accent thick. But we've heard fine words before. They don't keep you warm at night. Jonathan nodded slowly. You're right. Words are cheap. So let me ask you this. What would actually help? Not what I think you need, but what you actually need. The question seemed to surprise them. People didn't usually ask. They assumed. They imposed. They offered help that came with conditions and judgment. Mrs. Chen spoke first, her English halting but clear. A place to sleep where I don't worry about being hurt. Medicine that I can afford. Maybe a kitchen where I could cook real food again. A job, Mr. Davis said. A real job where they don't care that I don't have an address. Where I can work and earn and have dignity again. Somewhere safe for Tommy, Maria added, pulling the small boy close. He's not mine by blood, but he's mine by choice. Somewhere he can go to school, be a kid, not have to grow up so fast like Lily had to. And Lily, after a long pause, said simply, I want to keep my family. Whatever happens, I want to keep them. They're all I have. That night wasn't about money, though Jonathan would spend plenty of it in the months to come. It was about presence. Listening. Really listening, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, to people whose society had trained him to ignore. It was about apologizing for sins that couldn't be undone but might, somehow, through action and time, be forgiven. For the first time, the wealthy man understood that success means nothing if you abandon the people who need you most. That net worth means nothing if you're not worth knowing. That all his properties and investments and achievements were hollow compared to the richness of connection he saw between these 5 people who had nothing but each other. As the rain continued to fall on that Seattle street corner, Jonathan Blake made a decision that would cost him money, time, and the respect of some of his business associates who would call him foolish. But for the first time in years, it felt like the right decision. The only decision. Okay, he said. Here's what I propose. No tests. No conditions. Just a chance. And for the first time since he'd arrived, Lily smiled at him, a small, tentative smile, but a real one. It was a start. Time passed, and lives changed in ways that neither Jonathan nor Lily could have predicted that cold evening in Seattle. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a fairy tale where money solved every problem instantly. Real change, meaningful change, required patience, understanding, and the willingness to fail and try again. Jonathan's first step was housing. He owned a small apartment building in the Capitol Hill neighborhood that had been sitting partially vacant while he decided whether to renovate and flip it or sell the property entirely. Instead, he converted it into transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness. Not a shelter, a home. With proper apartments, privacy, dignity. Mrs. Chen was the first to move in, and Jonathan would never forget the look on her face when he handed her the keys to a studio apartment with a full kitchen. She'd cried, speaking rapid Cantonese that he didn't understand but somehow felt deeply. Later, through a translator, he learned she'd been homeless for 6 years after her husband died and she couldn't afford their apartment on her fixed income alone. 6 years of surviving on the streets, of losing her dignity piece by piece. "I can cook again," she'd whispered, touching the stove like it might disappear. "I can cook." Mr. Davis was harder. He had pride. The kind of pride that comes from a lifetime of work before a series of bad breaks and worse luck had left him on the streets. He didn't want handouts. So Jonathan offered him something better, a job as a property manager for the apartment building. Real work, with real responsibilities and real pay. "You've survived years on the streets," Jonathan had told him. "That takes skills most people don't have. Problem solving, conflict resolution, resource management. Those are valuable skills. I need someone who understands what these residents are going through. Someone they'll trust." "That's you." Mr. Davis had stared at him for a long moment before taking the offered hand and shaking it. "I won't let you down. I know you won't." Maria's situation was complicated. She was undocumented, which meant traditional employment was difficult and housing was risky. But Jonathan connected her with an immigration lawyer who worked pro bono, started the process for legal status, and in the meantime, employed her through his property management company in a role that was above board and protected. And Tommy, little Tommy who had seen far too much in his 6 years, enrolled in a good elementary school. Jonathan personally ensured he had everything he needed: school supplies, a proper winter coat, a backpack that wasn't falling apart. More importantly, he had stability for the first time in his young life. But Lily was the most complicated case of all. Child Protective Services got involved when they learned about her situation. There were investigations, interviews, mountains of paperwork. Technically, she should have gone into the foster system. Technically, Jonathan had no legal claim to her. But Lily had other ideas. "Mrs. Chen is my grandmother," she'd told the social worker with such conviction that it almost sounded true. "Mr. Davis is my uncle. Maria is my aunt. This is my family. You can't separate us." The social worker, a tired woman named Patricia who'd seen every kind of situation in her 20-year career, had looked at this unusual family with skepticism. But she'd also seen something that made her pause. Lily was thriving. She was healthy, attending school regularly, and surrounded by adults who genuinely cared about her well-being. "This is highly irregular," Patricia had said. "Most good things are," Jonathan had replied. In the end, a compromise was reached. Jonathan became Lily's legal guardian, but with the understanding that she would maintain close relationships with the adults who had kept her alive. It wasn't traditional. It didn't fit into neat boxes on government forms. But it worked. Lily moved into Jonathan's penthouse, a decision that shocked his business associates and made headlines in the local business news. "Millionaire real estate developer takes in homeless child," read one article, as if it was some kind of publicity stunt. But Jonathan didn't care about the headlines. He cared about the 12-year-old girl who had her own bedroom for the first time in her life, who spent the first 3 nights sleeping on the floor because the bed felt too soft, too unfamiliar. "It's okay to use the bed," he'd told her gently on the 4th night, finding her curled up with a blanket on the carpet. "I know," Lily had whispered. I'm not used to things being this nice. What if it goes away?" It won't go away. I promise. People break promises. I know. Your mother didn't deserve a broken promise. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to keep this one. Slowly, over weeks and months, Lily began to trust. She started using the bed. She decorated her room with drawings and photos. She brought Tommy over for playdates where they could just be kids, playing video games and eating too much pizza. Jonathan enrolled her in therapy, good therapy, with a counselor who specialized in childhood trauma and grief. He attended father-daughter therapy sessions too, working through the complicated feelings that came with their unusual relationship. He was her guardian, yes, but he wasn't trying to replace her mother. He was trying to be something different, a safe adult, a stable presence, a person who showed up. School was an adjustment. Lily had missed a lot of education while surviving on the streets, but she was brilliant. Hunger for knowledge in a way that reminded Jonathan of himself at that age, before cynicism had set in. He hired tutors, worked with her teachers, celebrated every small victory. The first time she brought home a report card with straight A's, she'd been nervous showing it to him, as if she expected him to dismiss it or find fault. Instead, Jonathan had hugged her, the first time he'd really hugged her, and to his surprise, she'd hugged back. "Your mother would be so proud," he'd whispered. "Do you really think so?" "I know so." As for Jonathan himself, the transformation was just as profound. His business didn't suffer despite his colleagues' predictions. If anything, it improved. He developed a reputation for ethical development, for considering community impact, for hiring people others wouldn't give a chance to. Profits didn't decline, they actually increased as consumers gravitated toward a company with values. But more than that, he found purpose where he'd only known profit. Humility where there had been hubris. Redemption in the eyes of a child who had every right to hate him but chose, gradually and painfully, to trust him instead. A year after that cold evening on the Seattle streets, Jonathan organized a dinner at his penthouse. Everyone was there, Mrs. Chen, cooking in a kitchen 3 times the size of her apartment. Mr. Davis, who'd been promoted to managing 3 of Jonathan's properties. Maria, whose legal status was progressing and who'd started taking English classes at the community college. Tommy, who'd lost his front tooth and couldn't stop showing everyone. And Lily, who'd grown 3 inches and started smiling more often than she frowned. They looked like a family because they were a family, unconventional, assembled from broken pieces, but whole nonetheless. "I want to say something," Lily announced during dessert, standing up with the kind of confidence that would have been impossible a year ago. "I want to thank Jonathan for giving us a chance. But more than that, I want to thank all of you for teaching me what family really means." She looked at each person in turn. "Mrs. Chen taught me that kindness doesn't run out, even when everything else does. Mr. Davis taught me that pride and asking for help can exist together. Maria taught me that home isn't where you're from, it's who you choose. And Tommy," she smiled at the little boy, "you taught me that joy is still possible, even when things are hard." Then she turned to Jonathan. "And you taught me that people can change. That second chances matter. That maybe the world isn't as cold as I thought it was." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Because sometimes, the smallest hands carry the biggest lessons. And sometimes, it takes losing everything to find out what truly matters. This story isn't about wealth or poverty, it's about who you choose to be when no one is watching. It's about the tests life gives us and whether we pass or fail them. It's about children teaching adults what humanity really means. It's about second chances we don't deserve but receive anyway, and what we do with them once they're given. The child found safety, education, and family. The man found purpose, humility, and redemption. And on the streets of Seattle, 7 people who might have remained invisible instead found each other, proving that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They can only be built, one act of kindness at a time. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel something real, hit that like button right now. Let me know this story reached you. If you believe that stories like this can change people, that they can remind us what truly matters in this world, subscribe to this channel. Because I'm committed to bringing you more stories that do exactly that. Stories that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of our shared humanity. Now, here's my question for you, and I really want to know your honest answer. What would you have done in Jonathan's situation? If you had walked past Lily that evening, would you have stopped? Would you have tested her like he did? And if you discovered the connection to her mother, what would your next step be? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done what Jonathan did? Drop your answer in the comments below, and please be honest. There's no judgment here. I read every single comment, and your perspectives genuinely matter to me. They help me understand who you are and what stories resonate with you. And remember that question from the very beginning? Where are you watching this from? I've seen comments from people in over 40 countries, and it absolutely amazes me how these stories travel across borders, languages, and cultures. So comment your location, your city, your country, wherever you are in this world. Let's build a global community of people who believe in the power of compassion. Here's something else I want you to think about. Are there people in your own life who you've walked past without really seeing? Not necessarily people experiencing homelessness, but anyone, a lonely neighbor, a stressed coworker, a family member you haven't called in months. This story isn't just about Jonathan and Lily. It's about all of us and the small choices we make every day that either connect us to others or isolate us further. Maybe today is the day you make a different choice. Maybe today is the day you stop and really see someone. Maybe today is the day you become the person who changes someone else's story. More powerful stories are coming. Stories about redemption, about second chances, about the unexpected ways life tests us and how we can rise to meet those tests. Stories about people like you, like me, like all of us who are just trying to figure out how to be better in this complicated world. You don't want to miss them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being the kind of person who watches a 15-minute video about compassion and human connection instead of scrolling past to the next quick distraction. You give me hope that there are still people out there who believe in the power of kindness. See you in the next story. Until then, remember, the smallest hands sometimes carry the biggest lessons. And sometimes, the person who needs saving the most is the one who thinks they don't need anyone at all. Take care of each other out there.